Happy Friday and welcome inside the Millvale Studios for this week's edition of Geit's Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Geitka, and always a highlight of my week to stop on by and talk some sports with you, dig in deep, and also look at some of the lighter sides of the sports many of us take so seriously, myself included. It's a pleasure to have you along. You can find me on Twitter at Matt Geitka, MattGajtka. Also on Facebook at Matt Geitka Sports Media. And you can find River's Edge content at riversedgepgh.com, streaming 24/7. We have local music going all the time. Well, almost all the time, unless we have one of our many talk programs, which continue to grow on the network. Good to be in my second year as we come to the end of the month of July, our final show for the month before we turn the page over into August. And this time of year always brings to mind one of my favorite comedy sketches of all time. Comedy, I guess, bits would be a more appropriate label for that. But the late George Carlin, one of my favorites, he always had a way of pointing out idiosyncrasies and inconsistencies in our language, and I love language-based comedy. He had a bit called Baseball versus Football, and as Steelers camp begins on this Friday, if you're listening live, overlapping with Pirates season by about a couple of months, that is the battle that's going on right now in the hearts and minds of people not just in Pittsburgh, but across the country. Not that you can't be a fan of both baseball and football, but the two sports in some ways are so diametrically opposed that I do find it humorous when they do come together and just how different they are. And this battle, this baseball versus football, has been going on since the 50s and 60s when the rising tide of pro football crested and eventually overwhelmed Major League Baseball as our true national pastime. I know baseball still likes to call itself that, and maybe pastime is a better way to describe baseball as compared to football, which is more of an obsession for most people in this modern era. But the older sport in baseball has been playing catch-up ever since the 60s and 70s, and it doesn't look like it'll win the race, at least in the foreseeable future. But that George Carlin bit spoke of the military feel of football, technological, the brute force necessary to win in football, while baseball is pastoral. That's the basis for the jokes. In baseball, you want to go home. In football, you're trying to make it to the end zone. So there's just such a dichotomy between the way we describe both sports and the way we speak about and write about both sports. And when football camps begin, I guess whether it be pro or college, pro starts the cycle, and then we move along the line to college and high school. But once that starts, then you do have that collision between the two sports that used to rule the entertainment calendar in this country. Basketball has certainly risen ahead of baseball, and with soccer and hockey competing for eyeballs and attention spans, it's no longer as easy as it used to be for baseball to claim number two. And even this time of the year, people love to discuss what's going on in the offseason. If you're in Pittsburgh, it's about what the Penguins are going to do to revamp and recharge as they go after a second consecutive Stanley Cup. If you're a basketball fan, if you're our friends up in Cleveland, I'm sure you're still thinking about the Cavaliers championship as much as you are the Indians' run to the top of the American League Central. And here in Pittsburgh, we have the Pirates in contention for a playoff berth for the fourth consecutive year. I guess in contention for the sixth consecutive year, but they've made it to the playoffs 3 straight seasons coming into this one. Yet the edge on the excitement can tend to fall away when Latrobe starts bustling with activity, and I spoke about this briefly with today's producer, Brian Crawford, on his show this past Monday on River Talk. We discussed how the Steelers tend to steal the oxygen at this time of the year. Maybe it was more of the case in years past before the Penguins started to really compete for that number one spot in Pittsburgh. But it is true. It does continue to be a collision, a fight this time of the year, late July into early August, and moving on down toward the kickoff of NFL season in September. But when baseball and football collide, it's such a compelling battle because it is our most individualized team sport. Baseball, you take turns, very democratic, and that part of it appeals to many, including myself. As I cover the Pirates, I should mention that I cover the Pirates for DKPittsburghSports.com. That is my day job, and that has always appealed to me. The fact that you don't have to compete with the defense to get your shot at the plate. Yes, you do. Once you put the ball into play, then anything can happen, and the defense in baseball has control over what happens more often than not. That separates it from football, certainly, where the quarterback is in charge and the offense is the one instigating. But in baseball, as I can list off the many reasons in which it's different from the rest of our games, but baseball, I think the one thing that does stand out in sharp relief to me is that it is essentially an individual sport, but played in a team setting. And maybe the only spot where the team really comes into play is on defense, and even then you have to rely upon your teammate to make the play. I suppose that's kind of like in football too, when you trust the system and trust the scheme. But it boils down to individual skill more often than not in baseball, and whereas in football it's sold to us as the ultimate team game. Now, the quarterback has such control over what happens, especially in this modern pass-happy era, but there are 22 players on the field at any one time, 11 on one team, and each of them has a specialized, individualized job to do. So maybe that's the one aspect where baseball and football do overlap, because the jobs are so different. The positions are so different and specialized, as opposed to a sport like basketball where there are positions, but everyone is essentially trying to do the same thing. Everyone can handle the ball. Everyone can score. That's not the case in football, certainly. And in hockey, similar thing. Goalies are specialized, but the five skaters on the ice have a great deal of freedom, relatively speaking, if your coach isn't too particular and the sport isn't too overcoached, which can be the case. But football and baseball do have that one thing in common, even as we tend to speak of them so differently. And going back to the late George Carlin, I was just watching Baseball versus Football on YouTube, and you can check that out as well to see how he does such a fine job of delineating the differences between them. I speak out against war references in sports. That's part of my weekly Kill the Cliche often. That makes me uneasy. I don't like to compare real war with pretend war, but football has been designed to be a quest to acquire territory, and it is a war game. So I understand why we have so many of those references to battle, so many of those metaphors that maybe cross the bounds over into military action. And this is the time of the year to use one of those myself, when trenches are dug, and baseball tries not to lose too much ground when training camp begins. And if you look at it culturally, there maybe is one common thread. There are plenty of good old country boys in each sport. Football is played in the American South, and I would say that's the spot in this country where football has the greatest hold, but baseball has a hold too. And so many of our players from this country, maybe for reasons of weather as much as anything else, but many of our baseball players come from places like Georgia and Texas and Florida, because you can play year-round, and also, for whatever reason, that sport has got a toehold there. But otherwise, in baseball, it's more of an international game. There are, there is plenty of Latin American influence, and we're starting to see more and more from the Far East. They have always played the game over there. And even in Europe, the Pirates have a prospect from Lithuania, believe it or not, named Dovydas Neverauskas, and he would be the first Lithuanian player to make the major leagues as he's one step away in AAA. It's not quite hockey in its European influence, but it's getting there. And baseball is a global game in that way. Whereas football, it's our game, if we can be honest about it. And while you do have all colors and backgrounds of Americans who are into it, from black to Hispanic to white, and Asian Americans as well in short, small doses. But it is an American sport, and this is the only place where it is played to this degree and loved and enjoyed and proliferated to this degree, from high school to college to pro. So that's just another area in which football and baseball differ. And I tend to like sports that include the world, and football is insular. We certainly are not prohibiting other countries from playing it, but they have their own version of football, as you probably know, and that has spilled over into America. American football spilled over into Europe with the World League and later NFL Europe, and it continues to be played in smaller leagues and in far-flung outposts. However, it is nowhere near the worldwide spread of baseball, and I mentioned hockey and certainly soccer, which is played in some form or fashion in every country on the planet, whether it be a huge place like, of course, the United States or Mexico, or over in Europe, Russia, China. Even the smallest island nations have their own national team. And in football, I guess it's the one sport. It used to be maybe baseball that was felt this way, but football is the one sport that we control and we contain within our borders. I think that might appeal to some people. It plays into our ideas of American exceptionalism, and that, of course, leads right back to acquiring territory and playing war games. And just the very nature of the sport is aggressive. It is transgressive at times. It's physical. It is indeed, in many ways, the opposite of our former national pastime, which has ceded that role off to football. And as the Steelers take the field in Latrobe, it is just another reminder of where those battle lines are drawn and how that fight stands 30, 40 years since football really took control and turned the former hierarchy on its ear here in America and our sporting culture. We'll take a break and discuss mostly baseball coming up. In our second period, we'll have our regular check-in with Alan Saunders, my good friend, a reporter for several outlets here in Pittsburgh, including Pirates Prospects, Pittsburgh Sporting News, and Pittsburgh Sports Now. And in just a moment, we'll get him on the line to chat about the Pirates and Pitt. In fact, one of the beats he covers for many of those outlets I just listed to you. This is Geik Scott Game on the River's Edge. We shall return.
Would you be interested in developing conscious choice? Would you be interested in creating reactions rather than waiting for one to come? Would you be interested in combining serendipity and synchronicity? Would you be interested in making 1 + 1 = 3? Would you be interested in finding out about full impact mindfulness? If so, I challenge you to join myself, Jim Ellermeyer, a cognitive behavioral health therapist, every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. on the River's Edge, where we will challenge you to allow us to help you help yourself to fully participate in your life. Let the adventure begin.
Back in Millvale for the second period, I'm Matt Geika, and this is Geik Scott Game on this Friday, July 29th, our final show of July. And you can join the River's Edge for coffee and conversation on this very day, 10 a.m., if you are listening live just a couple hours away. The event is at 21st Coffee in the Strip District. Katie Dudas of Scare House and Awesome Cast will join our very own Brian Crawford for a live and very caffeinated show. That's 10 a.m., July 29th, live at 21st Coffee in the Strip District. I've never been there. I'll have to check that out in short order. Also coming in short order, our guest during the second period. We haven't chatted with him in about a month. I think the last time we did it was shortly after the Penguins won the Stanley Cup, but we're looking at more baseball and the University of Pittsburgh with Alan Saunders, a reporter for Pirates Prospects, Pittsburgh Sporting News, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and the Associated Press. Alan, did I miss anything along the way? I don't want to sell you short.
The Beaver County Times also.
That's right. There we go. So make it 5 outlets, in fact. So a man in demand, although he is on vacation right now and graciously giving up some of his time after he just got done covering an 8-game homestand for the Pirates. Alan, your worlds collided a little bit last night. It was Pitt night at the ballpark at PNC, or 2 nights ago, I should say, on Wednesday. And Chancellor of Pitt, Patrick Gallagher, threw a truly terrible first pitch to football coach Pat Narduzzi. That wasn't the finest moment for those 2 Pitt men, but I would have to say that they probably enjoyed themselves nonetheless.
Yeah, it was a rare piece of synergy for my 2 beats there as they came together. And yes, it seemed like both of them had a very good time.
How was your experience at BNC Park on Wednesday? That was a fun game, was it not? Just with the acrobatic defense the Pirates showed off, and we saw a rarity. In fact, something that never happened before. Garrett Cole completed his first game in 88 career starts for the Pirates. He made it through all 9, and after a laboring start in the first inning at 20 pitches, he showed exactly why the Pirates remain high on him and why so many in baseball believe that he could still develop into that true number 1 type pitcher. That was exactly what we witnessed on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I wrote that it was a piece of catharsis for Pirates fans there, and that the team, for at least one night, really looked like the team that so many thought they could be this season, offensively, defensively, and pitching-wise.
And baseball, of course, leaves room for, I don't want to say aberrations, but you have moments where every team, even a 60-win team, can have a game or 2 like that along the way. But you said catharsis. That's a good word for the cheer that we heard for Jung Ho Gung, who's going through, an awkward situation. We still don't know what exactly is going to go on there. But one thing we do know is that he's been in a terrible hitting slump. And he had the hit that broke the game open, a 3-run double. Andrew McCutchen, though, more pointedly, after speaking at length before the game, he seems to be getting more open about his struggles as he realizes this is not just a slump. This could be a true down season for him. But he picks up 3 hits, RBI double in the 3rd, and then a 3-run homer in the 8th inning. And the crowd responded to it, and, of course, McCutchen did too. He's been searching for some kind of consistent feel, a consistent approach at the plate, and who knows if he found it. But you wrote something for Pirates Prospects last week. You talked to the hitting coach, Jeff Branson. You talked a little bit to McCutchen himself and Clint Hurdle. What's your best guess on where he is right now and if he is close to figuring things out?
Well, from what I wrote, it seems like he's been having difficulty with swinging from pitches outside the strike zone at a higher rate than he has in the past, and swinging and missing at pitches, especially elevated pitches inside the strike zone, at a much, much higher rate than he has in the past. As far as a root cause for that, I guess it's as good as anyone's. I do feel like he had that series against the Cubs that was so promising, and I think the All-Star break actually ended up coming at a really, really bad time for him because I do think he sort of had things put together there where he had 3 pretty consistent games of solid production, and then goes on All-Star break and comes back and hits 189 or something like that in the next 3 series. So I think he was close, and now I think it's a matter of getting back to that, and maybe one game is so hard to tell, but maybe he has sort of gotten back to that good place. I thought the other thing that was, I guess, good to see is 3 for 5, like you said, double home run. But really, the home run, the double, even one of his outs were all hard hits. So it wasn't like it was a fluky success, and he was doing it against a hard-throwing left-handed pitcher who's had pretty good numbers. So I thought all that was a good sign for McCutchen, but I guess the true test will be whether he's able to repeat it going forward.
What's your feeling on whether the Pirates should have moved him down the order a couple of weeks ago? They already did. They moved him from second to third, and lineup optimization tells us that the third spot isn't as important of a spot as we once thought, and that was the reasoning for getting McCutchen out of it at the start of the season to put him in the number 2 hole where you don't face those nobody out nobody on in 2-out situations. The 3 hole gets that situation most often, and so you waste a hitter's production in that case. Kind of ironic that Gregory Polanco was bumped up to that 2 spot, and now he appears to be the Pirates' best all-around hitter. But would you have moved McCutchen? Would you have sat him for a few days? The Pirates have had terrific part-time work put in by Matt Joyce, who is having what could be his best season ever on a rate basis at age 31. And you have Sean Rodriguez, who proved again last night that he can be productive with both the glove and the bat in a resurgent year for him. So there are options for the Pirates if they wanted to shut McCutchen down for a little bit or move him to 5th or 6th in the order. Did you think either of those were viable options? Do you still think they're viable options? Because that was just really one good game we saw on Wednesday. As you mentioned, we don't know if that's going to continue.
I don't think moving him down in the lineup would have made that big of a difference, especially because during the same time that he's been struggling, Jungle Gong and Josh Harrison haven't exactly been killing the ball either. So if you're going to have 3 hitters that are in the 240 to 250 batting average range, you're not going to put them all together. So I guess it doesn't really matter where you put them. In my opinion, maybe moving him down to 5th or 6th for a game or 2 might have done something, but for him, confidence-wise or something like that, but show somebody like real tangible benefit of scoring more runs by changing the batting order, I don't think there would have been much of an effect there. As far as giving him a couple days off, like I said, I think maybe before he had shown that Cubs series, that I probably would have said yes. Find a day off, give him the day before it and the day after it off, and set him down for 3 days and sort of let him reset. But I think after seeing what he was able to do, I think, and really having a game plan for exactly where he needs to be now. As far as this is where he's been able to have success in these situations, and just get him right back to it. I think he's got to play now, because I do think he is close to, and I don't know if he's going to be, an MVP caliber player the rest of the way, but I do think he is close to being something more like the Andrew McCutchen that we've seen in years past. And if he's close, he's got to play to get there.
We can talk all we want about the Pirates offense. In reality, it hasn't been a huge issue. It's always pertinent to figure out how they can make it better. But the pitching staff has been quite possibly, the most disappointing unit in all of Major League Baseball, if you want to separate teams into hitting and pitching. And I guess defense, too, qualifies. But the Pirates pitching staff is in need of a starter. Neil Huntington said as much on Sunday at PNC Park in his weekly gathering with reporters. And, Alan, the names that we're seeing in reports out there tied to the Pirates have been guys who are under contract for longer term, or at least arbitration eligible, so you can keep them under club control if you were to acquire them. You mentioned you work for the Beaver County Times. You write for them occasionally. John Parado just wrote in the Beaver County Times that Shelby Miller of the Diamondbacks, who is currently in AAA, the D-backs are so down on him, is a target of the Pirates. We've heard reports about Nathan Eovaldi of the Yankees, and 4 pitchers down in Tampa now: Drew Smyly, Matt Moore, Chris Archer, Jake Odorizzi. These are all guys, as I mentioned, that are in their 20s that you could have for at least a couple more seasons, if not more, if you could extend them. All of them are not at the tops of their respective games, or else they wouldn't be available and they wouldn't be Pirates trade targets. But I guess the market is pretty light though for people who are at the top of the pitching totem pole, if you will. So this is the type of thing that the Pirates are going to have to, I suppose, I don't want to say settle for, but does this make sense to you that they would look for pitchers like this as opposed to 1-year rentals who you could say, you just need a 1-year guy and then you move on and you hand the pitching staff over to some of those prospects?
Well, I think that, this season has sort of shown that prospects are wonderful and extremely useful when it comes to winning a lot of baseball games, but they're also extremely unreliable at times. And so I do think that Francisco Liriano is sort of a big question mark as well. And so when you look at the 2017 rotation, I think the Pirates are pretty confident that Garrett Cole and Jameson Tyone are going to be there, barring injury or something like that. But beyond that, there's a lot of question marks. Liriano has been not good and certainly not consistently good through 2016. And then it's a bunch of rookie players that have less than a handful of career MLB starts to their name. So I think that there is a genuine desire to build in some sort of a safety net for not only the stretch of 2016, so that if Tyler Glasnow, Chad Kuhl, Stephen Brault, etc., aren't able to make an impact, that doesn't sell the rest of the team short on what could still end up being a playoff team, and also, sort of extend that time period that they have figured things out into 2017. When I asked Neil Huntington about John Jaso blocking Josh Bell at first base earlier this year, and he said, well, we don't look at it as being blocked. We look at it as he's giving us the opportunity to let Josh Bell take as long as Josh Bell needs to be ready at the major league level. And I don't think the Huntington feels that he did that with his pitching staff this season. The Pirates need pitching now to be competitive. They need players like Glasnow, Cole, Brault to be competitive. But if they add a player that's signed for 16 and 17, that gets them back to that situation where if the prospects work out, great. And if they don't, we also have a plan in place.
No doubt. It seems like a prudent approach. Even as earlier this year, I thought maybe they would not want to sign anyone long term, but that was before we saw how long it's taken Liriano to get his stuff together. And I think the Pirates are probably a little pessimistic at this point that it's going to happen, and they still have him signed for another year at $13 million. That is quite the chunk of the payroll for a team that spends in the bottom third traditionally in player payroll at the MLB level. So, Alan, is there anyone on this team, anyone in the organization that you wouldn't part with if it came down to acquiring a pitcher like Eovaldi, one of the Rays guys I mentioned, Shelby Miller? I guess my question is there an untouchable for you on this Pirates team?
I think, to me, Andrew McCutchen's struggles have made Austin Meadows untouchable.
Yeah.
He looks to be a starting center fielder for many years and looks to be a player that's going to be a starting center fielder at an extremely high, all-star type level for the Pirates. And if there was ever sort of a question as to what the Pirates were going to do when Andrew McCutchen becomes a free agent, I think this season has pretty well made up most people's minds that he won't be signing another contract in Pittsburgh, and that's going to make Meadows pretty much necessary in the outfield going forward. I honestly would have a really hard time imagining a trade in which they maybe for a guy like Chris Sale, but that's just not in the Pirates' MO at all. But I would have a really hard time imagining a trade where he gets sent out. I do think that they have a lot of similar parts as far as pitching prospects, and they have in Poole, Brault, Williams, three guys that are right at the edge of being major league ready, and I think that's something that's very attractive for teams that are trying to go through a large rebuilding process, but are trying to rebuild quickly. And they also have three guys in Sadler, Compton, and Nick Kingham that are all injured, but are basically at that same point in their career. So they sort of have their own depth there coming back next season to rebuild that pool from anyway, which I do think makes sort of those AAA pitchers sort of expendable commodities for them.
Before we let you go, Alan, and Alan Saunders has been our guest for the second period of Geiks Got Game. What do you have coming up on? I mentioned your work at Pittsburgh Sports Now. You've had some exclusive interviews there, including one with the athletic director, Scott Barnes, and also some of the talent on the field for Pitt and Pitt football and Pitt basketball. Don't want to forget that as well. Always of interest to Panthers fans. But what's up next for you in the coming weeks on the website?
We just had a nice long conversation with Pitt men's basketball coach Kevin Stalling. First part of that is available now, and the second part will be coming in the next day or so. And then, as soon as I get back from vacation, training camp starts. So we'll be down at the practice facility on the south side, watching several storylines there, but probably talking a good bit about the return of James Conner and, where Pitt stacks up with the ACC Coastal Division.
Pat Narduzzi, Pitt head coach, said that James Conner should be ready to go for the Panthers opener against Villanova, one of the best stories in sports, and he's written a few things for the Players Tribune I encourage everyone listening to check out. Bouncing back from cancer, James Conner, one of the most physically imposing players in college football, is going to get another crack at it here this fall, and we're all looking forward to that. Thank you, Alan, and thank you for your time. I know it's the first day of the vacation, so I didn't interrupt too much of it, I suppose.
No, it's anytime, and I will not rub it in too much about being at the beach while you're back at the studio.
Or in Milwaukee coming up this weekend, for that matter. There is a beach there, but it is a lake, not the ocean. We'll talk to Alan later, and we thank him for joining us. We'll be back on the River's Edge.
It's Henry Boney. Okay.
No,
Henry Boney.
You're making up names.
Weren't Lewis and Clark sleeping with Indian girls all the time?
No, they were sleeping with each other, I'm sure. But right, they had a dog named Seaman.
Win in Sparta.
Their dog's name was Seaman. Darius Lewis. Can't wait to get
Seaman first
20
class.
strapping young boys and a dog named Seaman.
Hey, Money Bags. Tune into Funny Money at 7 a.m. Thursdays.
Did you hear Tom? He said 7 a.m. Tune in.
Let's go to the third period. It is indeed crunch time, which is a terrible cliche, which means it's time to ban the cliche, everyone's favorite segment. And as is often the case with Ban the Cliche here on Geiks Got Game, I realize how overplayed these words and phrases are after I use them and feel stupid for doing so. You heard it in our previous segment with guest Alan Saunders that Garrett Cole, the Pirates' #1 pitcher, and trying to become the type of guy that can be relied upon to go 7, 8, or even 9 innings occasionally, but he completed his first game, an old school accomplishment for a guy who has some old school in him, in Garrett Cole, getting the job done against the Mariners in an interleague game on Wednesday night in just 94 pitches. And the word that comes to mind, the very zoo-like word, is workhorse. And that is certainly a common description of a type of pitcher that is what Garrett Cole is trying to develop into, to be a Madison Bumgarner, to be a Clayton Kershaw, to be a Jake Arrieta, to name several of the recent Cy Young contenders in the National League at least. And you think about even in the past, guys who aren't exactly at the very top in terms of results and rate stats and strikeouts and walks and things like that. But Mark Burley had a streak where he pitched 200 innings or more in several consecutive seasons. And in fact, in his last year, the Blue Jays tried to run him out there to artificially get to that spot, and it didn't quite work out for them. But it is, and it was, quite an accomplishment because someone has to cover these innings. And even though we're in an era of increased bullpen usage, of many relievers being a better option than your starter in the 5th and 6th inning, which never, ever used to be the case in this game, it is a sport in transition in that way. But there is dramatic value to a starter who can go deep into games. And Garrett Cole has often gotten caught up in big pitch innings, in innings in which he has to throw 20, 25, 30, because he can't quite finish batters off. And that way, Jamison Tyone, the recent call-up, has been better already in his young career. But as for Cole, he's been striving for that workhorse status, and workhorse is by far the most frequent word used when describing that type of ace, that type of top pitcher who eats up innings in addition to being among the best in his profession. And the 94-pitch complete game on Wednesday for Cole was a throwback, but we don't necessarily have to lump him in with thoroughbreds like Secretariat and Seattle Slew and American Pharaoh, to use a more recent reference. There are better ways of describing what Cole is trying to be than workhorse, especially because so many of us don't even know what a workhorse is. I just listed racing horses, so apparently I didn't grow up on a farm, as you probably realize, even though I did. Or I was raised in West Virginia. I was not really in the country. I was more of a city boy at heart. So workhorse doesn't resonate, I don't think, as much as it used to. So it's overused, and I think in a lot of ways it's also not really understood what we're even talking about. It's not particularly relevant, is what I'm saying, to the modern audience. So if you want to use a new agey term, volume pitcher would be the one that I would look to. You have volume shooters in the NBA or in college basketball, guys who put up a ton of shots in order to get their points. That's not always a compliment, but volume pitcher, for the most part, should be a compliment. And I think a lot of times volume is underrated in sports. We talk so much, and I'm guilty of it too, of looking into rates and per inning and per start, per whatever, in order to figure out who's the most efficient and who makes the best use of their volume of playing time. And of course, in the case of a pitcher, playing time is measured by pitches and innings. And volume pitcher could, in a lot of ways, be a backhanded compliment if a guy is like a Livan Hernandez at the end of his career, who was going 7 and 8 innings, but also giving up 4 and 5 and 6 runs along the way. That's not exactly what we're going for here, but especially in this era of increased bullpen usage, a volume pitcher is a good thing, because if you're not pitching well, then you're probably going to be removed. And there is usually no hesitation on the part of managers these days in that area. So if you are throwing large volumes of innings, then you are indeed being effective 99.9% of the time. And so, in that way, I think volume pitcher can replace a term like workhorse in our baseball lexicon, and we can thus ban the cliche in that way. We'll take a break and bring it back for overtime. Coming up, my final number, which is Steelers related. As I mentioned, the Steelers are infringing upon the Pirates' territory, and they're infringing upon my show at the back end today. That and a couple other news updates before we step aside for good on Gike's Got Game.
Stay clear of the streets, for God's sake! The timid and the fearful drivers are every bit as bad as the aggressive drivers. Nobody in Pittsburgh knows what a right-of-way is. I go down the road and I just sing this song, the gas is on the right, the gas is on the right. Hi-ho the highway, yo! The gas is on the right.
Get educated with Brian Crawford live Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. here on the River's Edge.
We are headed to overtime. I'm Matt Gike, and this is Gike's Got Game. Thank you for watching and listening. You can find us, of course, on the River's Edge at riversedgepgh.com, a new kind of radio, and I prefer this to be a different kind of sports talk, maybe not entirely new. We don't necessarily reinvent sports radio here, but taking a different angle, a different perspective, a different lens, as Pirates manager Clint Hurdle might say. And we have come to the end, or near the end, but I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that you can become part of the local music scene in Pittsburgh by becoming our patron. Who wouldn't want to become a patron? Through Patreon. Click the Patreon link at the bottom of riversedgepgh.com. We are your voice for local music and local talk, increasingly, in Pittsburgh. That's Patreon, Patreon.com, but you can just find the link. Forget the spelling bee at riversedgepgh.com. Time for the final number. As we work to the end of this week's show, the number is 28, as in the percentage above average that Le'Veon Bell was last season in an interesting stat called defensive value over average, which is calculated, defense-adjusted value over average, which is calculated at footballoutsiders.com. They've been doing awesome work. Aaron Schatz at the head of that steamship for about 10 years, finding ways besides the traditional yards and carries and passes and completions and interceptions and touchdowns to see exactly how valuable certain players are. In football, as I mentioned in the first period today, the very nature of football is a team-oriented sport, even at a position like quarterback or running back, where there is plenty of individual aspects. There are plenty of individual aspects that determine how things go, but there is a way to boil it down and try to separate team effects and defensive effects from what an individual player is doing, more so on offense than defense. And if you look at Le'Veon Bell last year, the Steelers running back out of Michigan State was the absolute best in providing value above average, 28.1%, in fact, so we'll call that the final number. And even though he missed half the season with a knee injury, or almost half the season, he was still, on average and per play, the best running back in the NFL for being part of the passing game as well as part of the rush game. And even though he didn't provide that value that we were just speaking of in the third period on this week's show, he still showed why he is maybe the most important player in the NFL to keep on the field, non-quarterback division. But as you probably know, Le'Veon Bell is also facing a 4-game suspension from the National Football League for missing drug tests this offseason. Bell maintains it's a miscommunication, and there have been a couple of national reporters, John Clayton, Jason LaConfora, who have said that Bell has a case, and he has an appeal, a legitimate appeal, to the NFL. So the Steelers may not be missing him at all this season, but they missed him at the start of the previous year because of a marijuana-related offense. He and LeGarrette Blount 2 summers ago got into some trouble on McKnight Road, as you may recall there too. But it will be a massive, massive problem for the Steelers if they don't have Le'Veon Bell for the first quarter of the season. They're already missing Martavis Bryant, who on a per-catch basis back in 2014 in his rookie year was one of the best receivers in football. He's going to be out for this entire year. Who knows if he ever plays. Another down for the Steelers, again, because of drug-related and marijuana-related issues. And we can beat that issue to death. We can dispute whether the NFL should even be testing for such a drug, which is becoming more and more accepted in American and, of course, world culture as the years go on. But the fact is that at the current time, the NFL does not allow its use, at least if it can detect it in your bloodstream, in your person. If they do test for it, if they do catch you, then you are not going to be able to do your job if there's a certain amount of missed tests or failed tests. And in the NFL's eyes, a failed test and a missed test are the same thing. So Bell, 28% better than average. It may not sound like a lot, but average is pretty good in the NFL. And then you add in nearly a third above that on a percentage basis, and you realize how much the Steelers will be missing their top running back if they do not have him on the field for the first 4 games. The Steelers, one of the favorites by Vegas reckoning and also by conventional wisdom to challenge for the Super Bowl as they were last year. And the offense is a large part of that, But missing Bell for the first 4 and Bryant for the entire season, that makes you rethink the calculus at least a little bit at the moment. A couple of news items before we go away. I always like to update you on the Riverhounds. Another loss for the Hounds at home. They still have 2 wins on the season, and the playoff zone is getting further and further out of reach. They'll be in Wilmington, beautiful Wilmington, North Carolina, to take on the Hammerheads this weekend before returning home next Friday. And I will be on the call for that match, or I should be on the Riverhounds YouTube channel. But the season from hell rolls on for the Hounds. And for the Penguins, the offseason is nothing much to speak of. In the last couple of weeks, we brought up Justin Schultz, the re-signing on the blue line, but as of right now, the Pens are just waiting on Matt Cullen, and that's it. So I don't anticipate any hockey-related news for the next few weeks, which will disappoint many of you, I'm sure, but that's just the point of the year at which we've reached. I know the offseason can be a great time for a debate, and we will certainly do that on this show, related to how the Penguins can best position themselves to repeat, but for now, we're coming up empty on the news front. That's it for Geiks Got Game this week, and we will try to do better the next time, as is often said in this business. But thank you for watching and listening. I'll be back with you again in studio, as it's been fun to not be on the road so much lately and be right here in Millvale. We thank the Millvale Studios for providing the forum for our show. Keep it tuned to riversedgepgh.com. This is Matt Geiger reminding you that when the radio fades, whether terrestrial or online, you know life's moving fast.